Imagine you're hurtling through this driving rain in the pitch black of night.
Right.
You're doing 104 miles per hour, and you are strapped into a 40-ton aluminum tube.
Just descending toward a wet runway.
Exactly. And you trust the pilot, right? You have to.
Yeah, of course.
And the pilot trusts the air traffic controller.
And that controller is trusting a multi-million-dollar automated radar system.
Right. And all of them, they all trust this set of rigid, heavily documented procedures that are basically designed to make commercial aviation the statistically safest mode of transport in human history.
Which it is. I mean, usually.
Usually.
Yeah.
But what happens when the radar just goes blind?
Yeah, or when the radios erupt into just like a squeal of static.
Right, or a sudden weather delay just completely overwhelms the humans in the tower.
And then, a massive 80,000-pound emergency vehicle gets explicitly ordered to drive directly into your path.
It's terrifying. Okay, let's unpack this. Today we are doing a deep dive into the chilling reality of what happened at New York's LaGuardia Airport.
Late Sunday night, March 22, 2026.
Yeah. The collision between Air Canada Express Flight 8646, which is a CRJ-900 jet, and a Port Authority fire truck right there on runway 4.
And this was a tragedy that marked LaGuardia's first fatal crash in 34 years.
34 years. That is a massive streak.
It is a monumental achievement, especially for an airport that is so notoriously congested, hemmed in by the water in the city.
Yeah, totally.
So it's precisely because LaGuardia is usually so safe that this specific failure really demands our absolute scrutiny. We aren't just looking at broken metal today.
No, we're looking at a profound systemic collapse.
Exactly.
So to do that, for everyone listening, we have pulled together a massive stack of sources for you.
We really wanted to get every angle on this.
Yeah. We've got the raw, on-the-ground news footage from News 12 and CTV, capturing that immediate chaos.
Which is really tough to watch.
It really is. And then we have the official briefing documents from the NTSB.
The National Transportation Safety Board.
Right. Plus, we're bringing in this complex legal analysis from King Law to parse the looming liability nightmare.
Which is going to be huge.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we are leaning heavily on these incredibly dense, frame-by-frame technical breakdowns from an aviation enthusiast forum called Team BHP.
Yeah, that forum is great. It's where industry insiders, pilots, and engineers really dissect the physics and the psychology of these events.
Right, because you need that diversity of information.
You do. I mean, if you only read the official press release, you just get a sterilized timeline,
Yeah. Just bullet points.
Right. And if you only watch the local news, you get the emotional impact, but you completely miss the underlying mechanics.
So by synthesizing the physics, the radar software algorithms, the radio architecture...
The legal framework.
Exactly. We can actually understand how this happened. We're going to put you right there on the tarmac, inside the control tower, and inside the cab of that fire truck.
Because understanding the why and the how behind this tragedy is crucial for anyone who ever hands their ticket to a gate agent and steps onto an airplane.
So let's start with those final seconds. The anatomy of a collision.
Right.
Picture the setup at LaGuardia that night. The critical window we are examining is incredibly narrow. Just 10 minutes.
Roughly 11:37 to 11:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
It's late. The weather is absolutely miserable. It's raining heavily. Visibility is terrible.
And the temperature is hovering right around freezing.
Which means there's a history of icing conditions throughout the Northeast Corridor earlier in the evening.
And those environmental conditions, they are the canvas this entire tragedy is painted on.
Right.
Because rain and darkness degrade human visual performance, obviously.
Yeah.
But they also degrade the performance of the machines.
Oh, wow. Like how?
Well, wet pavement changes braking friction coefficients. Heavy rain creates what radar technicians call clutter.
Or attenuation, right.
Exactly. Where the radio waves literally bounce off the precipitation itself, which just muddies the digital picture the air traffic controllers are relying on.
So out of that rain, you have Air Canada Express Flight 8646 descending.
Operated by Jazz Aviation.
Right, coming down from Montreal. A totally routine 1-hour commuter hop. The aircraft is a Bombardier CRJ-900.
Very common, very reliable twin-engine regional jet.
And they are cleared to land on runway 4. But at the exact same moment, a massive Port Authority aircraft rescue and firefighting vehicle.
An ARFF truck.
Yeah, an ARFF truck is driving across that very same runway.
And we need to clarify something here because there was a lot of initial confusion about the violence of this impact.
Right. One of the users on the Team BHP forum, they highlighted an early article from NDTV They claimed this was just a low-speed collision,
Yeah, they reported the plane was only doing about 24 knots.
which is what, maybe 27, 28 miles per hour?
Yeah, around there. Which structurally contradicts everything we know about aviation physics.
And the photographic evidence from the morning after.
Exactly. I mean, a CRJ 900 hitting a truck at 28 miles per hour. It would cause a massive dent, a crumpled runome, maybe a collapsed nose gear.
But not this.
No. The sheer, devastating kinetic energy required to cleanly sever the entire cockpit section from the fuselage.
And violently flip a fully loaded Oshkosh Striker fire truck onto its side.
Right. That implies a drastically higher velocity.
And the flight tracking data, the NTSB data broadcasting from the plane itself, proved that those early reports were completely wrong.
Yeah, the NTSB preliminary findings confirmed it.
At the exact moment the nose of that jet struck the side of the fire truck, the aircraft was traveling at roughly 104 miles per hour.
Or 167 kilometers per hour. We really need to quantify the energy involved here.
Let's do it.
Okay, so kinetic energy equals 1/2 the mass times the velocity squared.
The velocity is squared.
Exactly. That means speed acts as a massive multiplier for destructive force. A CRJ 900 landing at LaGuardia, carrying 76 people, plus fuel reserves, it weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 70,000 to 80,000 pounds.
Wow. And the fire truck isn't a normal vehicle either. It's not just a city fire engine.
Far from it. An Oshkosh Striker ARF vehicle is essentially a specialized tank.
Right.
When fully loaded with thousands of gallons of water, specialized fire retardant foam, and dry chemicals, it also weighs upwards of 80,000 pounds.
So you literally have two objects of roughly equal immense mass.
Yes. But one of them is hurtling forward at over 100 miles per hour, and the other is crossing its path like a concrete wall.
God.
The sudden deceleration of the aircraft from 104 miles per hour to 0 in a fraction of a second. It generates G-forces that the human body and aluminum airframes simply are not designed to withstand.
Which brings us to the devastating human cost of this.
Yeah.
Because in the very front of that aluminum airframe were two human beings.
Yeah.
30-year-old Antoine Forrest from Coteau-du-Lac, Quebec, and his co-pilot, Mackenzie Gunther.
They took the absolute brunt of that 104 mile per hour impact. They lost their lives instantly.
They did. But, as we dig into the passenger accounts and the physical evidence on the runway, a really powerful narrative emerges about those two pilots in their final seconds.
Right, because of what they did right before the crash.
Exactly. A passenger named Clément Leliev survived, and he specifically spoke to the press. He credited the pilot's, quote, incredible reflexes with saving his life.
And the lives of the dozens of people sitting behind the cockpit.
Yeah. Leliev described feeling the plane brake extremely hard, the absolute millisecond the wheels touched the runway.
Right before the deafening boom of the impact.
And the skid marks on the wet pavement completely corroborate this.
The pilot saw the fire truck materializing out of the dark in the rain.
They knew the collision was unavoidable.
But they didn't freeze. They initiated a maximum performance deceleration.
So let's talk about the mechanics of that. What does a pilot actually do to achieve maximum braking in a CRJ 900?
It's a coordinated, highly aggressive, multi-system action. The moment the main landing gear compresses, sensors in the struts tell the aircraft's computers that it is on the ground.
Okay.
The pilots immediately deploy the ground spoilers. Those are the panels on top of the wings that flip up to kill the aerodynamic lift.
Right, which forces the full weight of the aircraft down onto the tires.
Exactly. At the exact same time, they apply maximum pressure to the toe brakes on the rudder pedals.
And these aren't normal brakes.
No, the CRJ 900 uses heavy-duty carbon brakes equipped with a highly advanced anti-skid system. It's much like an ABS system in a car, but vastly more powerful.
Because it has to modulate brake pressure dozens of times a second so the tires don't lock up and blow out on that wet runway.
Right, and simultaneously they would have thrown the engine thrust reversers into maximum reverse.
Which physically redirects the jet exhaust forward to act as an aerodynamic brake.
Exactly.
So they threw everything they had, spoilers, carbon brakes, thrust reversers. They threw all of it at the physics of the situation in maybe a 2-second window.
Yes. And going back to our kinetic energy equation, where velocity is squared,
Right.
if those pilots managed to scrub off even 10 or 15 miles per hour in those final desperate seconds, they exponentially reduce the total destructive energy of the collision.
A user on the Team DHP forum, going by it wasn't me, did a really grim but honestly necessary analysis of the crash geometry.
Oh, about where they hit the truck.
Yeah. They pointed out the sheer, terrifying luck of exactly where the plane hit the truck. Because of that heavy braking, the CRJ essentially rear-ended the back half of the fire truck.
Right, if the plane had arrived just half a second earlier.
Or if it had been traveling just slightly faster because the pilots hadn't braked so aggressively.
The geometry changes completely. The heavy chassis of the fire truck would have sliced directly through the center wing box of the CRJ 900.
And the wing box is where the fuel is.
Exactly. The wings are the fuel tanks. You would have had an instantaneous release of thousands of pounds of highly combustible jet fuel.
Just atomized into a fine mist by the impact.
Right adjacent to the sparks of grinding metal and the incredibly hot carbon brakes. It would have resulted in a massive, unsurvivable conflagration.
Wow. So the fact that this crash did not result in a post-impact fire is a direct result of the pilot's final actions and the fractional geometry of the impact.
Yeah, they fought the aircraft all the way to the absolute end.
But even without the fire, the violence of the structural failure at the front of the plane is just unimaginable. I wanted to look at the story of Solange Tremblay.
The flight attendant.
Yes, she was stationed at the front of the cabin.
Her survival is one of those anomalies of physics that accident investigators will literally study for years.
Because the impact completely sheared the forward section of the aircraft.
Right, and she was strapped into her jump seat, which is typically mounted against a bulkhead near the forward boarding door.
The force of the collision tore that section of the plane apart, and Tremblay, still fully strapped into her jump seat, was hurled completely out of the disintegrating wreckage.
She was ejected from the aircraft. The NTSB investigators noted she was found a significant distance from the main debris field.
That's insane.
The angular momentum and the sheer G-forces involved in being thrown like that while remaining securely fastened to a piece of the aircraft structure are staggering.
It's essentially like being inside a centrifuge that suddenly shatters.
Exactly.
Her daughter spoke to a Canadian TV station, CTV, and said her mother's survival is a total miracle. She said she must have a guardian angel.
She suffered multiple fractures to her leg and required immediate surgery, but amazingly, she survived.
And she wasn't the only one. When you look at the drone footage from News 12 the next morning, you see the crumpled nose of the jet, the fuselage peeled back like a tin can.
Bundles of wiring and oxygen lines just dangling into the rain.
It looked entirely unsurvivable. Yet, out of the 41 people hospitalized, 38 were treated and released the very next day.
That is the quiet triumph of modern aerospace engineering.
How does that even work?
Well, while the front of the plane took the fatal blow, the passenger cabin behind it did exactly what it was designed to do. An aluminum tube is remarkably strong when pressurized, but engineers actually designed the substructure of these aircraft to act as energy-absorbing crumple zones.
Kind of like a modern car.
Exactly. The floor beams, the seat tracks, the seats themselves, they are engineered to dynamically deform up to certain G-load limits to absorb the kinetic shock wave before it reaches the human spine and internal organs.
That's incredible.
The fact that the cabin remained largely intact, allowing people to evacuate, is why the fatality count wasn't 76.
But the psychological trauma for those 76 people. We have a quote from Rebecca Lickery. She was a passenger who had just gone up to Montreal for a cousin's baby shower.
A completely mundane, happy weekend trip.
Exactly. She described the descent as totally normal. She felt the sudden, violent braking and then just a deafening boom. She told the local reporters, quote, "Everybody just jolted out of their seats, people hit their heads, people were bleeding."
She described the sheer terror of the immediate aftermath. The lights go out. The cabin is filled with the smell of spilled jet fuel and dust from the shattered interior panels.
Right. And she talked about passengers fumbling in the dark, helping each other out of the emergency overwing exits.
Sliding down the wet wing onto a tarmac littered with jagged metal, pouring rain, and screaming sirens.
She said, "I would have never pictured a 1-hour flight that I've done countless times ending like this."
That sentiment perfectly encapsulates the illusion of routine that we all share.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we treat commercial aviation like getting on a city bus. We put our headphones on, we watch a movie, we complain about the legroom.
True.
We completely insulate ourselves from the fact that we are participating in a highly complex, fiercely kinetic operation that requires absolute, unbroken perfection from hundreds of unseen individuals and interwoven computer systems.
Okay, so it sounds like a multi-car pileup in heavy fog, where the GPS and the traffic lights are giving you completely opposite instructions.
That's a great way to put it.
But here's my big question. We're told aviation is built on redundancies. If the plane was cleared to land, how does a massive fire truck end up directly in its path at 104 miles per hour?
To understand that, we have to naturally shift the focus from the runway up into the control tower, because that's where the sequence of errors began.
The psychological and operational pressure cooker of what the aviation industry calls the midnight shift.
Right. According to the NTSB briefing, there were 2 controllers up in the tower cab at the time of the accident.
Okay, 2 controls.
There was a local controller, who was the person actually talking to the planes taking off and landing, and a controller in charge who acts as the supervisor for the facility.
And the shift change had happened around 10:30 p.m., right? Roughly an hour before the crash.
Yes. And the midnight shift is a known vulnerability in human factors engineering.
Really? Why is that?
Biologically, our circadian rhythms are crashing at that time. Your core body temperature drops, your cognitive processing speed naturally slows down.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about the biological aspect.
Yeah, and visually, managing an airport changes entirely. During the day, you look out the window and you see a physical airplane.
Right.
At night, especially in heavy rain, you look out the window and you just see an abstract sea of moving lights reflecting off wet concrete. It is incredibly fatiguing.
I can imagine.
And because flight volumes traditionally drop off a cliff after 10:00 p.m., staffing levels are reduced to an absolute skeleton crew.
Which makes sense. 2 controllers might be perfectly adequate for a quiet, routine Sunday night.
Exactly. But the data shows this was anything but a routine Sunday night.
Let's look at those numbers. Reuters and CTV pulled the flight tracking data from an analytics firm called Cirium. Between 10:00 p.m. and 11:37 p.m. when the crash occurred, there were 70 commercial flights taking off or landing at LaGuardia.
70 flights in roughly 97 minutes.
Yes. And to put that in perspective, the historical average for a Sunday night in late March over the last 4 years was only 53 flights.
And the original schedule for that specific night only called for 31 flights.
So they were handling more than double the traffic they were scheduled to handle. Why the massive discrepancy? Where did an extra 39 airplanes suddenly come from at 11 o'clock at night?
The weather. As we mentioned, there was a freezing rain system moving through the area earlier in the evening, and in the aviation network, icing is the ultimate bottleneck.
Right, an airplane cannot take off with even a millimeter of ice on its wings.
It destroys the aerodynamic lift, so every departing plane has to go through the de-icing pads. This takes 15 to 30 minutes per plane.
Which means the departure queue backs up. The gates back up.
Arriving planes from other cities are told to enter holding patterns in the sky, or they are held on the ground at their origin airports, what's called a ground stop.
So the entire system acts like a dam, holding back a massive reservoir of metal.
Yes. And when the temperature finally ticks up a degree or two, and the freezing rain turns to regular rain, the dam breaks.
Oh, man.
You get what controllers call a flush. Every delayed flight from Atlanta, Chicago, Miami, and Montreal is suddenly rushing into New York airspace at the exact same time, frantically trying to land before the airport's mandatory nighttime curfew or before the flight crews time out and exceed their federally mandated maximum working hours.
So these 2 controllers, who clocked in at 10:30 p.m. expecting a sleepy shift managing 31 planes, walk into a raging storm of 70 planes converging on their airspace.
The radio frequency is jammed, the radar screen is lit up with targets, and they are trying to sequence this massive wave of heavy jets onto intersecting runways in the rain.
But even that isn't what broke the system, because right in the middle of this flush, an entirely separate crisis erupts on the ground.
Right, and this is where cognitive capacity reaches its breaking point. While trying to land the Air Canada jet and dozens of others, the controllers are suddenly dealing with an emergency involving a United Airlines flight that was trying to take off.
The NTSB confirmed the United flight had aborted its takeoff twice. They had an indicator light showing a fault in their anti-ice system. And crucially, the pilots reported a strange, acrid odor in the cabin that was making the flight attendants feel physically ill.
And when a flight crew reports an unknown odor, smoke, or fumes, the air traffic control rulebook dictates that it is an immediate drop-everything life safety emergency.
Wow, drop everything.
Yeah, an unknown odor could be a simple electrical short in a coffee maker, or it could be a toxic, smoldering fire in the avionics bay that will burn through the flight controls in 3 minutes. You don't wait to find out.
So the moment that United pilot declares an emergency, the tower hits the crash alarm.
Right.
And the airport's rescue and firefighting teams, the ARFF trucks, are instantly mobilized out of their firehouse.
Right.
So now let's look at the mental state of the local controller. He isn't just managing the 70 planes in the sky. He is now simultaneously trying to route a convoy of massive emergency vehicles through maze of active taxiways, coordinating with the United plane, and making sure the incoming airplanes don't hit anyone.
And this is where we get to the fatal sequence of words spoken over the radio.
Yeah. 2 minutes and 17 seconds before the crash, the tower controller keys his microphone and clears Air Canada 8646 to land on runway 4.
He tells them they are number 2 for landing, meaning there is one plane landing right in front of them, but the runway is theirs.
It's a completely standard clearance.
Totally standard. The pilots in the CRJ-900 acknowledge they are on short final, they're running their landing checklists, configuring the flaps, maintaining their glide slope.
The total focus is narrowed down to the geometry of the runway threshold, rushing up at them through the rain.
But then, just 20 seconds before the Air Canada jet crosses the threshold, 20 seconds before impact, the exact same controller keys a different microphone and clears Truck 1 and Company, the convoy of fire trucks, to proceed across runway 4 at a specific intersection called Taxiway Delta.
It is the ultimate fatal contradiction.
You have two heavy, fast-moving objects operating on intersecting physical vectors, and both of them have been given explicit, unequivocal permission by the ultimate authority of the airspace to occupy the exact same piece of concrete at the exact same time.
12 seconds before touchdown. The Air Canada jet is perhaps 200 feet in the air. The controller looks out the window, or looks at his radar, and suddenly realizes the catastrophic error he just made.
The audio recordings from the tower are chilling. You hear the sheer panic in his
He
voice.
starts frantically yelling over the radio, "Stop, stop, stop, Truck 1! Stop, stop, stop! Stop, Truck 1!"
But physics doesn't care about frantic radio calls 9 seconds before impact. 9 seconds is an eternity if you're sitting in a meeting.
Right.
But when you are trying to halt an 80,000-pound top-heavy fire truck driving on rain-slicked pavement while an airliner is dropping out of the sky at 104 miles per hour, it is mathematically too late.
The inertia of the truck carries it directly into the path of the aircraft. We actually have audio from the aftermath as well. 18 minutes after the metal stops grinding. The runway is covered in foam. Sirens are wailing. The same controller is still in the tower cab,
Still plugged into his console.
trying to route the remaining planes away from the disaster he just inadvertently caused. He is talking to a pilot of another aircraft holding short of the runway, who watched the entire collision happen.
And the controller's voice is completely hollow.
He says over the open airwaves,
Yeah.
"We were dealing with an emergency earlier. I messed up."
And the pilot on the ground, witnessing this man's career and soul essentially shatter in real time, replies with incredible grace. He just says, "Nah, man, you did the best you could."
That specific radio exchange is profoundly heartbreaking.
It really is, and it is vital to understanding the philosophy of modern accident investigation. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy gave a press conference shortly after, and she very pointedly warned the media and the public against the primal urge to point fingers at a single distracted controller.
Right, she invokes a concept that is foundational to aviation safety.
Yeah.
The Swiss cheese model of accident causation.
Exactly.
I want to spend some time on this Swiss cheese model because it is the lens through which we have to view everything that follows. How does the NTSB actually apply this model?
So it was developed by a psychologist named James Reason. Imagine a stack of Swiss cheese slices sitting on a table. Each slice represents a layer of defense in a complex system.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
One slice is the pilot's training. Another slice is the air traffic controller's procedures. Another slice is the radar software. Another slice is the physical warning lights on the runway.
Got it.
In a perfect world, these slices are solid armor. But in the real world, human beings get tired, software has bugs, and sensors degrade. Every slice has holes in it. There are vulnerabilities.
Okay.
Usually, if a threat slips through a hole in one slice, say, a pilot misreads an instrument, it is immediately stopped by the solid part of the next slice. The co-pilot catches the error. The system absorbs the mistake.
So an accident only happens when the holes in every single slice of the cheese continuously, momentarily align. The threat passes straight through the entire stack without hitting a single barrier.
Precisely. The controller clearing the fire truck onto the active runway while a plane was landing was a massive hole in the cheese. It was an act of failure.
But the NTSB's job isn't just to say he made a mistake.
No. Their job is to find out why he was put in a position to make that mistake and why none of the subsequent layers caught it.
Right. They are heavily investigating what they call conflicting information regarding the division of labor in that tower cab during the flush of traffic.
Let's unpack that division of labor, because typically an air traffic control tower operates with strictly defined roles.
Right. At a busy airport, you have a local controller who only looks up. They manage the active runways and the planes flying in the immediate airspace.
And you have a ground controller who only looks down. They manage the taxiways, routing the planes to the gates, and crucially, they manage the movement of all ground vehicles, the baggage carts, the tugs, and the fire trucks.
They operate on different radio frequencies.
Yeah.
They're entirely separate jobs.
Yes, but during a midnight shift, when staffing is reduced to 2 people, it is very common practice to combine those roles.
Really?
Yeah. One controller takes over both local and ground control frequencies, while the other controller acts as the supervisor, handling phone calls to other radar facilities and managing flow control.
So if the controller who cleared the fire truck was trying to work both the air frequency and the ground frequency simultaneously during a 70-flight weather rush and an emergency response, that is a systemic recipe for cognitive overload.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your brain literally cannot maintain situational awareness of both domains at once. You experience cognitive tunneling, where you fixate on the most pressing issue, the United emergency, and you completely drop the peripheral data, like the Air Canada jet on a 2-mile final.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. If the FAA knows that human brains are susceptible to cognitive tunneling, if they know that a controller managing a weather flush and an emergency at midnight is eventually going to drop a mental ball, where were the computers?
Yeah.
LaGuardia is not a rural crop dusting strip. They have millions of dollars of technology specifically designed to act as the final, impenetrable slice of Swiss cheese. If a controller accidentally orders 2 vehicles to crash, the radar is supposed to scream at them.
That is the multi-million-dollar question that has the entire aviation industry holding its breath right now. Because that technology exists. It was installed at LaGuardia. It was powered on.
And yet it stayed absolutely terrifyingly silent until the metal bent.
It did. Let's dig into the radar mechanics, because this is where the system completely breaks down. LaGuardia is one of 35 major airports in the United States equipped with a highly advanced, incredibly expensive system called ASDEX.
It stands for Airport Surface Detection Equipment, Model X.
Think of ASDX as an all-seeing digital god over the airport surface. It doesn't just rely on one source of data. It fuses information from a spinning primary surface radar on top of the tower, sensors embedded in the pavement, and multilateration antennas that read the transponder signals broadcasting from the aircraft. Wow. It takes all this data and creates a real-time, high-fidelity digital map of every single moving object on the runways and taxiways.
And its entire reason for existing is predictive collision avoidance. Its algorithms constantly calculate the speed and trajectory of every object.
Right.
If it predicts 2 targets are going to occupy the same space within a certain number of seconds, it triggers a blaring, inescapable alarm in the tower cab, accompanied by flashing red targets on the controller screens.
And it has a phenomenal track record.
Oh, yeah.
Over the last decade, ASDEX has saved countless lives. It prevented a Southwest 737 from landing on top of a private jet in San Diego.
It stopped a JetBlue plane from colliding with a Learjet in Boston.
It is arguably the most important safety net on the ground. But on March 22nd at LaGuardia, with an 80,000-pound truck driving in front of a jet, nothing, no alarm.
Nothing. NTSB investigator Doug Brazy gave a press briefing, and he provided a highly technical explanation for why ASDX failed. He stated that the system did not generate an alert due to the, quote, close proximity of vehicles merging and unmerging near the runway.
Merging and unmerging. That phrase is the key to understanding radar software vulnerability. Explain that to me. Because to a layperson, an 80,000-pound fire truck seems like a pretty hard thing for a radar to miss.
To understand this, we have to differentiate between how a human eye sees the world and how primary radar sees the world. A human eye processes light. A primary radar processes radio waves that bounce off physical objects and return to the antenna. It's called a skin paint return.
Okay.
But radar is inherently messy. It bounces off everything. It bounces off buildings, it bounces off fences, and vitally, it bounces off heavy precipitation. When it is pouring freezing rain, the radar screen fills up with what they call clutter.
Just noise on the screen.
Right. To make the screen usable for the controller, the ASDEX software uses complex filtering algorithms. It says, okay, ignore everything that isn't moving fast enough to be a threat, and ignore fuzzy, amorphous returns that look like weather.
So the software is constantly trying to guess what is a solid object and what is just noise.
Exactly. Now, picture the emergency response to the United Airlines flight. It isn't just one fire truck, it's a convoy. You have multiple massive Oshkosh Stryker vehicles driving bumper to bumper down a narrow taxiway.
Oh, I see where this is going.
When the primary radar pulse sweeps over that convoy in the heavy rain, the individual radar returns bleed together. The physical trucks are so close to each other that the software cannot distinguish where one truck ends and the other begins.
The software looks at this massive metal moving down the taxiway and just sees one giant continuous target.
It sees a blob. And because the shape of the blob is constantly shifting as the trucks turn corners or slightly change their spacing, merging and unmerging, the software tracking algorithm gets confused.
So it can't track them properly.
To predict a collision, the software first has to establish a high-confidence track. It has to lock onto a discrete target and say, this is target A. It is moving at 30 miles per hour on a heading of 040 degrees.
But because the blob keeps changing shape, the software drops the track and tries to reacquire it.
It keeps resetting. Because it can never lock in a high-confidence track, it essentially handcuffs its own predictive algorithms. It cannot calculate where the fire truck will be in 10 seconds, so it physically cannot trigger the alarm, even as the truck rolls onto the active runway.
But wait a minute. We know that modern airplanes don't just rely on bouncing radar waves. They have transponders.
Right.
They actively broadcast a digital signal saying, I am Air Canada 8646. I am exactly at these GPS coordinates, and I am traveling at 104 miles per hour. The ASDEX uses that data, right?
It does. The secondary radar, the transponder data, is perfect. The system knew exactly where the Air Canada jet was at every microsecond.
So why does the fire truck have a transponder?
Because it is a ground vehicle. The NTSB confirmed this is a massive gaping hole in the Swiss cheese. The Port Authority fire truck did not have an ADSB transponder, specifically an ADSB squitter, which is the device that broadcasts its GPS position to the tower.
How is that possible? We force every single Cessna flying over a farm field to have an ADSB transponder by federal law, but we don't force a massive emergency vehicle operating at one of the busiest airports in the world to have one.
It comes down to FAA regulations and funding. The FAA strictly mandates ADSB transponders for aircraft operating in controlled airspace. But they do not legally mandate them for airport ground vehicles.
They don't mandate it.
No, they highly encourage it. The FAA even runs grant programs offering to pay for the installation of transponders on snowplows, tugs, and fire trucks. But many airport authorities balk at the integration costs or the maintenance overhead of adding sensitive avionics to heavy-duty diesel trucks.
If that fire truck had been equipped with a transponder.
If that truck had a $50 ADSB squitter on its roof, the blob problem completely vanishes. It wouldn't have mattered if the primary radar was confused by the rain or the convoy. The transponder would have been shouting its exact identity and GPS coordinates to the ASDEX computer once a second. The computer would have instantly realized with mathematical certainty that a vehicle was accelerating toward runway 4 while a jet was descending on short final. The alarm in the tower would have sounded 10, maybe 15 seconds earlier. The controller would have yelled stop before the truck even reached the edge of the pavement.
That is infuriating. The technology to prevent this exists, but a regulatory loophole allowed it to be absent from the exact vehicle that caused the crash.
Yeah.
But the transponder issue and the radar blob are only half of the technological failure, because LaGuardia also has physical lights embedded in the concrete, the RELs. The runway entrance lights.
Yes, and this introduces a deeply complex psychological element to the tragedy. The REL system is brilliant because it is entirely decentralized from human decision-making.
They are literal bright red lights embedded flush in the pavement of the taxiways, right at the hold short lines where the taxiway intersects the runway.
And they are hardwired directly into the ASDEX radar network. If the radar detects an aircraft taking off or landing at high speed, which we know it did, it tracked the Air Canada jet perfectly. The system automatically illuminates the RELs.
The pavement glows bright red.
It is a physical, undeniable visual signal to any pilot or vehicle driver approaching that intersection that says, do not cross this line. A high-speed target is approaching.
And according to the initial NTSB briefing, they believe the RELs at Taxiway Delta were functioning properly that night.
Which presents us with a terrifying paradox of authority. The RELs were almost certainly illuminated. They were glowing bright red through the rain, glaring right up into the windshield of the fire truck. They were explicitly telling the driver, Sergeant Michael Orsillo, to stop.
But simultaneously in his headset, the air traffic controller, the ultimate omnipotent human authority of the airport environment, had just given him explicit verbal clearance to proceed across the runway.
Truck 1, cross runway 4.
Exactly. When a machine tells you to stop and the human authority tells you to go, whose orders do you follow?
We found a really fascinating breakdown of this exact dilemma on the Team BHP Aviation Forum. A user named Driverless pointed out a core tenet of modern aviation training, the concept of automation priority.
What's that?
In the air, if two airplanes are on a collision course, a computerized system called TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance System, will sound an alarm in the cockpit. It will verbally command one pilot to climb, and the other pilot to descend.
Okay.
Crucially, pilots are rigidly trained that if the automated TCAS tells them to dive, but the human air traffic controller on the radio tells them to climb, they must ignore the human and obey the machine. Every single time.
And the logic behind that training is sound, right?
Oh, absolutely. The machine has a faster processing speed. It has a flawless three-dimensional geometric picture of the collision. The human controller might be confused or looking at a delayed radar sweep or mixing up call signs. We learned that lesson in blood over the skies of Uberlingen in 2002 when a pilot obeyed an ATC command over a TCS command, resulting in a mid-air collision.
It's exactly like driving up to a rare road crossing where the red lights are flashing and the bells are ringing, but a police officer is standing there waving you across the tracks. Which authority do you trust?
Exactly.
So if aviation mandates that pilots prioritize the computer's red lights over the human's voice, why didn't the fire truck driver do the same thing? If the RELs were red, ground traffic should prioritize that physical stoplight over the ATC command to cross.
Theoretically, yes. A red light means stop. You hold your position, you key your radio, and you say, Tower Truck 1, I have a clearance to cross, but my runaway lights are red. Please verify.
So why didn't he?
But we have to look at the human psychology operating inside that fire truck at 11:37 p.m. In a high-stress environment, humans almost always defer to the direct human voice. You assume the police officer possesses critical information that the automated system lacks.
The driver, Sergeant Orsillo, is responding to an emergency. He might have looked at the red lights and thought, the controller knows I have a red light, but he's clearing me anyway because he knows this United Airlines emergency takes absolute precedence over whatever plane might be landing.
It's an authority bias. You assume the system controller has the master plan, and the tragedy is the controller didn't have a plan. He was just overwhelmed.
Which perfectly exposes the next layer of the Swiss cheese. We keep talking about the emergency response, the convoy of trucks. But if you look at a map of LaGuardia, my immediate question is, why on earth are we designing a system where 80,000-pound fire trucks are routinely driving directly across active runways in the first place?
Yeah, you'd think they wouldn't do that.
Right. If they know a plane is landing, couldn't they just take a perimeter road, drive around the runway?
This is perhaps the most intractable, deeply ingrained systemic flaw in the entire event. We call it the emergency response paradox. It is a situation where a federal regulation explicitly designed to save lives creates the exact geographic conditions for a fatal disaster.
You were talking about the FAA 3-minute rule.
Yes. Part 139 of the Federal Aviation Regulations governs airport certification. It mandates that in the event of an emergency alarm sounding, the airport's rescue and firefighting services, the ARFF vehicles, must be able to reach the midpoint of the farthest runway within exactly 3 minutes.
3 minutes, from the moment the bell rings to the moment you are spraying foam.
It is a hard, fast, non-negotiable metric. And like all aviation regulations, it is written in blood. Aircraft fires burn incredibly hot. The fuselage of a modern airliner will burn through in about 3 minutes.
Wow.
The rule is designed to ensure that if a plane crashes, firefighters can begin suppressing the flames and cooling the cabin to buy the passengers precious seconds to evacuate before the environment becomes unsurvivable.
It's a noble rule.
Okay.
But let's look at the physical reality of a sprawling multi-runway hub like LaGuardia or JFK or Chicago O'Hare. These airports are massive. The runways are essentially giant concrete islands surrounded by intersecting taxiways, terminal buildings, and parked aircraft. If an emergency happens on runway 13 and the fire station is located on the opposite side of the airfield near runway 4, taking the safe route, driving around the outer perimeter road of the airport, yielding to baggage carts, navigating blind corners might mean driving 3 or 4 miles.
Which mathematically makes meeting that 3-minute mandate utterly impossible. You cannot drive a top-heavy, water-filled fire truck at highway speeds around blind corners in an airport.
So what's the alternative?
Therefore, the only way an airport can legally comply with the life-saving 3-minute rule is to allow the fire trucks to take the most direct geometric path. And the most direct path, like drawing a straight line across a spider web, almost always involves cutting straight across active runways.
So crossing active runways isn't some rogue cowboy maneuver by the fire department. It is a daily global operational requirement.
It happens at major airports all over the world hundreds of times a day, and it is usually perfectly safe because it is tightly choreographed by the air traffic controllers.
Exactly. Another forum user on Team BHP, Jerome, explained this brilliantly. He has an aviation background, and he noted that emergency vehicles responding to an active alert generally get ultimate, uncontested priority over the entire airfield.
Right. If a fire truck needs to cross a runway to put out a fire, the ATC can and must order any landing planes to abort their approach. They tell the passenger jets to go around, to apply full power, climb back into the sky, and get out of the way so the fire trucks can cross unimpeded.
But on this Sunday night, that coordination completely evaporated. The local controller was trying to thread a needle. He was looking at his radar screen, trying to squeeze the Air Canada jet onto the runway, and figuring he could sneak the fire trucks across the pavement immediately after the jet rolled past.
He was trying to solve two problems at once instead of prioritizing the emergency and sending the jet away.
But we can't just blame the controller in the tower. We have to look at the cognitive environment inside the cab of that fire truck. Put yourself in the driver's seat with Sergeant Orsillo and his partner, Officer Baez.
The sensory overload inside an ARFF vehicle responding to a code is staggering. You have a 700 horsepower diesel engine roaring beneath you. You are navigating a complex, angled intersection at Taxiway Delta in the pouring rain where the pavement markings are obscured by standing water.
And your radios. Mike O'Donnell, a former FAA safety official who was quoted in one of the source reports, noted that the radios inside that truck cab would have been absolute chaos. Because they aren't just talking to the control tower.
No, they are coordinating with the New York Fire Department. The NYFD city units are rolling to the airport perimeter to provide backup. The ARFF commander is barking orders over their internal frequency, trying to figure out exactly which taxiway the United plane with the smoke in the cabin is parked on.
So you have blaring NYFD dispatch radios, internal command radios, the physical sirens wailing on the roof of the truck, the sound of the rain. And amidst all that deafening noise, they are required to monitor the aviation ground control frequency, listening intently for their specific clearance to cross the runway.
And here is a critical, absolutely devastating detail about how aviation radio architecture works. The ground vehicles, the fire trucks, the tugs, the plows, they all operate on the ground control frequency. Let's say it's 121.9 megahertz.
But the Air Canada jet, descending through the rain, they aren't on that frequency. They are communicating on the tower frequency, let's say 118.7 megahertz.
They are two completely separate radio channels. The pilots of the Air Canada jet had absolutely no idea that a massive fire truck had just been given clearance to cross their runway because they physically could not hear the ground frequency.
Wow.
And conversely, the fire truck drivers couldn't hear the power clearing the Air Canada jet to land on top of them. They were operating in completely siloed information bubbles.
So the only person on the entire airport who had access to both sides of the conversation was the single overloaded controller in the tower.
It gets worse. Because aviation radios don't work like your cell phone. They operate on amplitude modulation, AM radio waves.
All right, the NTSB revealed a terrifying detail in their briefing. About a minute before the crash, a crucial radio call from an unidentified airport vehicle to the tower was stepped on.
Stepped on is aviation slang for heterodyne interference. Unlike your car's FM radio, where the strongest signal simply overrides and blocks out a weaker signal, the capture effect AM radio waves physically collide and combine in the atmosphere.
What does that mean in practice?
If two people press the transmit button on their microphones at the exact same microsecond on the same frequency, the physical radio waves mix together. The result is a loud, garbled, unintelligible squeal, often called a beat frequency.
So a vital piece of communication, perhaps a truck asking for clarification, perhaps the controller trying to issue a warning was lost to the ether. It just sounded like a burst of demonic static in the controller's ear.
An expert from the Team BHP forum, going by Minivan Driver, speculated on a horrifying possibility regarding this radio architecture. When the controller realized his catastrophic error 12 seconds before the crash, he frantically yelled, "Stop, stop, stop, truck one."
But what if, in his panic, he accidentally pressed the transmit button for the tower frequency, the one the plane was listening to, instead of the ground frequency that the fire truck was monitoring?
We don't know for absolute certain yet. The NTSB has to analyze the cockpit voice recorders to see what the pilots actually heard. But if he keyed the wrong mic, Sergeant Orsillo in the fire truck might have driven onto that runway in total radio silence.
Completely unaware that a man in a tower was screaming for him to stop.
If we pull back and look at the entire sequence, it is a profound tragedy of competing mandates.
The regulation designed to save lives in one emergency. The 3-minute rule driving the response to the United flight.
Exactly. It created the exact geographic and psychological conditions that caused a new, far deadlier emergency on runway 4. Rapid response protocols collided violently with runway safety protocols.
So you have blaring sirens, a confusing intersection, pouring rain, and an ATC clearance. How does the aviation industry untangle this web of responsibility? Who is ultimately held accountable when everyone was just trying to do their job?
That is the incredibly complex, multi-million-dollar question that will consume armies of federal investigators and aviation lawyers for the next decade. Which brings us out of the wreckage and into the immediate aftermath, the investigations and the incredibly fraught legal battles that are already looming.
The timeline of the investigation is painfully slow. The NTSB GO team, supported by Canada's Transportation Safety Board since Air Canada was involved, was on the scene within hours. The physical recovery of the evidence was grim work. Investigators literally had to use power saws to cut a hole in the crushed roof of the CRJ-900 to retrieve the black boxes, the flight data recorder, and the cockpit voice recorder from the tail section.
The protocol is rigid. NTSB Chair Homendy stated they expect to release a preliminary report in about 30 days, but that report will offer zero conclusions. It will simply lay out the established facts, the weather data, the radar tracks, the radio transcripts, much of what we've discussed today.
So when do we get actual answers?
The final ruling, the official determination of probable cause that assigns systemic blame, will require anywhere from 12 to 24 months of painstaking analysis of metallurgical fatigue, psychological modeling, and software code auditing.
And while the investigators pore over the data, the physical impact on LaGuardia was massive. The airport is a vital artery for New York, but runway 4 was closed for days. The debris field was catastrophic. It stretched all the way from taxiway Delta, completely across the width of runway 4 and into the grass.
It wasn't just twisted aluminum and shattered carbon fiber. There were immense environmental hazards. The fire truck ruptured, spilling thousands of gallons of specialized firefighting foam, hundreds of gallons of diesel fuel, and hydraulic fluid all over the porous concrete.
That all had to be meticulously contained and remediated by hazmat teams before a single plane could use that runway again.
The physical cleanup is measured in days and weeks. The legal cleanup is measured in years. And it revolves around a remarkably complex area of law.
We looked at some excellent legal analysis provided by King Law regarding the civil liability implications here. When an air traffic controller makes a catastrophic mistake, you don't typically sue the individual controller. They don't have the assets to cover a multi-million-dollar judgment. You sue their employer.
And in the United States, air traffic controllers are employed directly by the Federal Aviation Administration, the U.S. government.
And suing the federal government introduces the concept of sovereign immunity. Historically, you could not sue the king. Today, you cannot sue the U.S. government unless the government explicitly allows you to.
That permission is granted through the Federal Tort Claims Act, or FTCA. The FTCA allows private citizens like the injured passengers or the families of the deceased pilots to sue the government for negligence committed by federal employees who are acting within the scope of their employment.
But the FTCA is a minefield. King Law points out that plaintiffs have to navigate the discretionary function exception. You can't sue the FAA for making a broad policy decision, like deciding not to mandate transponders on ground vehicles. That's a discretionary policy choice. You can only sue them for a specific operational failure, like a controller violating an established procedure by clearing two vehicles onto the same runway.
And the FAA will absolutely not be the only defendant in the crosshairs. We are looking at a classic case of joint and several liability. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which owns the physical airport infrastructure and employs the firefighters, will face intense liability claims.
Right. Why did they voluntarily install transponders on their trucks? Why did their driver cross a runway if the REL lights were potentially illuminated red?
Even Air Canada and Jazz Aviation, the operator of the flight, will face scrutiny. Even though passenger accounts uniformly credit pilots Antoine Forrest and Mackenzie Gunther with saving lives through their aggressive braking, plaintiff attorneys will scrutinize the flight data recorder. Did they maintain proper approach speed? Did they react quickly enough when the truck appeared in their landing lights? In a civil suit, every single slice of the Swiss cheese is monetized.
And the lawyers are operating against a strict ticking clock. The statute of limitations under the FTCA is generally 2 years. Legal teams have to move aggressively right now to preserve ephemeral evidence. They have to secure the raw radar data before it is overwritten, subpoena the maintenance logs for the specific REL light bulbs at Taxiway Delta to prove they were actually functioning, and depose the surviving witnesses before memories inevitably fade or change.
Naturally, an event of this magnitude, shutting down a major New York airport and involving a foreign airline, instantly became a political football. We saw statements cascading from the highest levels of government within hours.
President Donald Trump addressed it during a press gaggle, calling it a terrible situation, and pivoting to note that aviation is a dangerous business. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney issued a formal statement from Ottawa, calling the loss of the Canadian flight crew deeply saddening and pledging Canada's full support in the investigation.
But the most intense political friction actually emerged around the issue of staffing, which cuts right to the heart of the midnight shift controversy we discussed.
Right. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy held a press conference and immediately defended the FAA's management of LaGuardia. He specifically cited staffing metrics, stating that the tower had 33 fully certified controllers on staff, against a facility goal of 37. He characterized LaGuardia as a well-staffed facility that was operating within completely normal parameters.
But the controllers union, NTSB, pushed back fiercely against that narrative. Current and former controllers spoke anonymously to Reuters, and they painted a very different picture of what well-staffed actually means in practice.
They argued that pointing to an overall roster of 33 controllers ignores the dynamic reality of weather delays. They argued that on a night when freezing rain causes a massive 70-flight flush of delayed traffic, a rigid two-person midnight shift schedule is a recipe for catastrophic cognitive overload. The union's position is that additional staff should have been mandatory held over from the evening shift to manage the surge, regardless of what the clock on the wall said.
The clash between the Transportation Secretary and the union highlights the tension between bureaucratic metrics and operational reality. The FAA schedules based on predicted volume. The union works the actual volume. When weather breaks the prediction, the human controllers absorb the gap until they break.
What's vital to understand about this entire process, the NTSB investigation, the FTCA lawsuits, the political hearings, is that the ultimate outcome will almost certainly not result in one single person taking the fall. The NTSB does not exist to punish. It has no regulatory authority. It exists solely to investigate and recommend changes to prevent the next crash.
So, based on the specific failures at LaGuardia, what kind of systemic changes could actually come out of this?
Well, we will likely see sweeping structural changes to global aviation. First, the most obvious technological fix. We could see the FAA finally eliminate the loophole and explicitly mandate ADS-B transponders on all airport ground vehicles operating near active runways. A $50 piece of electronics could eliminate the blob problem forever.
Second, we might see a fundamental restructuring of how ATC shifts are managed. The FAA might be forced to abandon the rigid midnight shift skeleton crew model, implementing dynamic staffing algorithms that require extra controllers to stay on duty anytime weather delays push a surge of traffic past 10:00 p.m.
Third, we will likely see an overhaul of the ASDEX software itself. Engineers will need to rewrite the tracking algorithm so that when the system is confused by merging and unmerging targets in heavy rain, it defaults to a fail-safe mode. It should err on the side of sounding an annoying false alarm rather than suppressing the alarm entirely while it tries to calculate a high-confidence track.
I am struck by a really profound contradiction here. If the law fundamentally requires assigning blame in order to award damages to the victims, how do you successfully sue a Swiss cheese model?
Exactly. How do you walk into a federal courtroom and try to fairly compensate the traumatized survivors like Solange Tremblay or the grieving families of Antoine Forrest and Mackenzie Gunther when the true culprit isn't a single bad actor acting maliciously? The culprit is a perfect storm of tiny, overlapping systemic flaws.
It is the great challenge of modern aviation tort law. Human nature, and by extension a jury, wants a villain. They want a clear, satisfying narrative of gross negligence. They want a drunk driver or a greedy corporate executive.
But modern aviation disasters are rarely narratives of villains. They are narratives of deeply flawed systems operated by well-meaning, highly trained professionals who are pushed imperceptibly beyond their cognitive limits. The plaintiff lawyers will have to painstakingly explain the entire Swiss cheese model to a jury of laypeople. They have to demonstrate how the FAA's rigid staffing policies, the Port Authority's budget choices regarding transponders, the FAA's 3-minute emergency rule forcing vehicles across runways, and the inherent software flaws in the ASDX radar all conspired in the dark to put that plane and that truck on an unavoidable collision course.
It's a daunting, incredibly dense task. Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. We've unpacked the terrifying final seconds of Air Canada Express Flight 8646. We've examined the physics of a 104-mile-per-hour impact. We've looked at the intense psychological pressure cooker of LaGuardia Control Tower during a weather flush. We've broken down the paradoxical failure of the ASDEX radar system and the merging blobs. And we've explored the impossible geographic line created by the 3-minute emergency response rule.
The LaGuardia tragedy stands as a harrowing, unforgettable reminder of the incredibly fragile ecosystem that keeps air travel safe. It is an ecosystem balanced precariously on the razor's edge between human judgment and technological automation. When one slips, the other must catch it. When both slip, we get March 22nd.
But I want to make sure we contextualize all of this for you, because hearing a detailed breakdown of systemic failure can make the prospect of flying seem utterly terrifying.
Context is vital. While this event was horrific and the loss of life is tragic, it is also statistically incredibly rare. As we noted at the very beginning, this is the first fatal crash at LaGuardia in 34 years. Millions of flights take off and land safely around the globe every single year.
And the reason they are so safe is precisely because of the merciless investigations that follow an event like this. The aviation industry is completely unique in its willingness to publicly dissect its own failures. Every single regulation in the book, every warning light on the dashboard, every redundant radio frequency is written in the lessons learned from past tragedies. The system learns, it adapts, it mandates new technology, and it becomes incrementally safer. The next time you fly, the system will be safer because of what investigators are learning at LaGuardia today.
It's a system constantly striving for perfection in an imperfect world.
Absolutely.
But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to mull over long after this audio ends.
What's that?
We are living in a society where we are increasingly handing over the keys to automation. We are putting our lives in the hands of self-driving cars, algorithmic medical diagnoses, and AI management systems. We are building a world of sensors and predictive models.
That's very true.
This tragedy at LaGuardia asks a deeply unsettling question about the future of human agency. When the human authority figure looks you in the eye and says, "Go," but the automated machine flashes a bright red light and says, "Stop," who should have the ultimate authority?
That's a powerful question.
The next time you're driving your car and you see a flashing automated warning light, whether it's at a railroad crossing, a construction zone, or a busy intersection, ask yourself, what would it actually take for you to ignore it? Because the exact answer to that question is where the next layer of the Swiss cheese is waiting to fail.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the complex systems around you, and we will catch you next time.